and welcome to Baha'i On Air. My name's Vivian Lee, and on this episode of Baha'i On Air, we'll be talking to Tony Howie. Now, Tony is an award-winning farmer from Timaru. Tony, welcome along.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Now, you're a long way from Timaru. Auckland is a long way to travel. What brings you here?
I came up for 2 or 3 different farmer meetings, one with a technical committee that I'm involved with regard to fertiliser, and we'll also come up to have a look and meet with some onion exporters based in Pukekohe.
So what sort of farming do you do down there in the south?
The farm type that we have is unusual in New Zealand in that most farming in New Zealand is based on the pastoral industry, growing grass for animals. And while we do some limited amount of that, most of our farming is for production of crops, and those crops include wheat, barley, peas, different seed crops. And the main crops that I grow and spend most of my time and effort in is 2 vegetable crops, and those being onions and potatoes.
So we won't see you at the dog trails?
No. You have a look at my dog, you'd know why. He's as round as he is long.
So why farming? Why did you decide on farming as a career?
I was brought up on the land, and I always enjoyed working on the farm and being part of agriculture. My ancestors go way back to the first 4 ships that arrived in New Zealand, actually, on my mother's side. And originally they established in the area where my family grew up. So it was a very established farming community, and our family was very established in that particular region. In fact, the road that we live on is the same name as my mother's maiden name, so that's how long it goes back. So I went to university and studied agriculture. From those studies I worked for the Maori Affairs Department, which both in the North Island and in the South Island of New Zealand, and looked at development of Maori land, and had the opportunity to go back to the family farm when my father retired in 1986. Since then I've enjoyed farming and I've enjoyed the challenge, and we've grown dramatically since that time. We started with 200 hectares. I farm now 650 hectares, and my brother farms a similar area. So we've developed rapidly in the last 15 years.
Is there anything that relates specifically to farming in the Baha'i revelation?
Yes, very definitely. The Baha'i Faith specifically talks about agriculture and the importance of agriculture and the study of agricultural science. In fact, I'd like to read a quote from the Baha'i writings. And the quote reads, "Strive as much as possible to become proficient in the science of agriculture, for in accordance with the divine teachings, the acquisition of sciences and the perfection of arts are considered acts of worship." So it's actually related to, be equivalent to an act of worship. And in fact, in the Baha'i writings, it also talks about work is equal to an act of worship also. So people in their daily lives can be worshipping God through the whole day, not just at certain times of the day. And it's a very important aspect of the Baha'i writings. And agriculture in particular is given a lot of prominence, particularly in the economic fields of society. This is a grading and packing facility in Timaru that I established, my wife and I established about 5 years ago. Since that time, there's been 3 or 4 other farmers that have come into business with us. The main purpose of this business is to grade and pack our onions for export, the onions we all grow on our farm. The business employs about 80 people during the season. It's very important in the Baha'i Faith, and as being part of the community, the Baha'i community, to serve. And to serve not only yourself and your own family, but also humanity as a whole, and contribute to society, and be of benefit to the wider community. And that's not just within the Baha'i community, but extend right out into the wider community. And as a consequence of that, many Baha'is travel and work in all different spheres and tend to go to different parts of the world. So we're a very widespread religion. I think we're one of the most widespread religions in the world.
Now, you've done quite a bit of travelling. Where have you been and why did you go?
Obviously, some of the travels I've done is directly related from some of the awards that I was lucky enough to win. But also, in New Zealand, generally farmers are very open-minded and will learn from wherever they think the best knowledge is. And that's something that I think is quite unique to New Zealanders, in that we don't care where we learn it from, and as a consequence of that, we will travel to Europe or America or Asia or wherever and learn new technologies, and we can adapt those technologies to our own lifestyle. It's sort of like the number 8 wire mentality of New Zealanders. And when you travel, you actually see in different parts of the world where that doesn't happen, and they're constrained by that. But New Zealand farmers, we're not constrained to the same degree. So we actually pick up a lot of technology from different aspects around the world, and that's one of the main reasons why I travel.
So where have you been?
We've been obviously a lot of time in the more developed agriculturally developed countries of Europe and the United States. But I've also spent some time in China, looking at doing some agricultural development projects within China, and try and lift their agriculture knowledge and get involved with them with certain projects.
And does your family travel with you?
Sometimes my family travels with me on some of these overseas trips, but the main time that they travelled with me was when we combined a work trip with a family trip, travelled to Haifa, and we went on a Baha'i pilgrimage, which is a period where a family or an individual is invited to the Holy Land, which is in Israel, where we spend 9 days going through the experiences of the Baha'i pilgrimage, which involves visiting the shrines of the founders of the faith. And meeting the people in our world centre, which is also based in Haifa.
Now, I had the great privilege a few years back to meet your lovely wife. We travelled around Opotiki together. It was visiting Baha'i. We had a great time.
Yeah, my wife, Afsaneh, it took me a while to pronounce her name, originated originally in Iran, and she is a 5th generation Baha'i. So her family's been a Baha'i for a long time. But that's probably not so important in the Baha'i writings, in the Baha'i faith. It's more important that people come to the faith through their own knowledge and their own volition. So while she's a 5th generation Baha'i, and the family has a lot of maturity in the Baha'i faith, it's very important within the Baha'i faith that we come to understand truth for ourselves. We call it independent investigation after truth.
My parents gave me the opportunity to decide for myself when I was 15. To choose which way I want to go, and I saw no other option to accept the Baha'i faith, because it embraces all other religions. So for me, it's like being accepting all religions to be a Baha'i. I was the first religious refugee, Baha'i refugee, who came to New Zealand. I was studying in the Philippines, and the revolution happened in Iran, and I couldn't go back home. And I came here, and my brother actually sponsored me to come to New Zealand.
And I met her at a Baha'i summer school in Blenheim, where we met and shortly after decided to get married.
Now, is she from a farming background in Iran?
She is, in a way. She's from pistachio. Her father has a pistachio orchards in Iran. But of course, after the revolution, much of that property was confiscated. So her family were cut off from those lands. But farming in Iran is much different to farming in New Zealand. And in fact, the farm owners normally live in the cities, and the peasants, the workers, live on the farm. And I think, generally speaking, when she announced that she wanted to marry a farmer in New Zealand, that was probably considered to be quite cool, quite neat in Iran, until they learnt that she was actually going to live on the farm, because only peasants live on the farm in Iran. And that goes back to the history of the Iranian agriculture, where they don't have any of the modern conveniences that we have in New Zealand. In New Zealand, it's probably the opposite. If you live in the country, you're considered to be wealthy.
It was very difficult at the beginning to adjust, being lonely, being isolated, but then again, on the other hand, I had beautiful surrounding and clean and peaceful place to live in. I really do enjoy living on a farm now. I've got used to it.
Well, we don't live very far out of a small city in the South Island, out of Timaru, so she goes to Timaru at least once a day, and she works as well. She teaches English as a second language, which is a major achievement for somebody that English is her own second language. So she's adapted very well to New Zealand society and culture. And I think that's really important for Baha'is, is when they come to a new country, they immerse themselves in the culture and adapt to that culture and become part of it, rather than becoming separated from it. And I think my wife in particular has done that very well.
You couldn't get more immersed in Kiwi culture than down on the farm in Timaru, could you really?
Yeah.
A little birdie told me that you actually won some awards for your farming. Now, what were the awards and what were they for?
I began farming in 1987, so 3 years after that we won our first award. I was in partnership with my brother at that stage. The award was really judged on performance of the operation and the way the operation ran, and it was more on the farm and how it ran and the business side of the farm. So that's why we won that award, and that entitled us to some travelling money to go overseas. So that was quite an achievement at that stage.
So what was the second one?
The second award was a Nuffield Scholarship, and I applied for that when I was, I think, when I was not much over 30 years old, and I think I was the youngest recipient of that award. But it was judged on an interview primarily, and also your reputation within the farming community. It was judged on the ability, or the perceived ability, of the applicant to be a farm leader in the future, and that was what the main criteria was. And there's 2 every year selected from within New Zealand to travel to different parts of the world. I travelled to Europe and Eastern Europe and America, and studied many different topics, including some topics related to production and marketing, but also other issues relating to water and even organic production, and different subjects that I looked at while I was there. So that lasted for a period of 6 or 7 months. The third award I won in the year 2000, and it's called a Rural Excellence Award. There used to be, historically, this was given to one farmer from the North Island and one from the South Island, and in more recent years it's been just presented to one recipient through the whole of New Zealand. And it's in recognition of excellence in agriculture. And I think primarily why I was selected in this particular instance was because 2 or 3 years before receiving this award, I was one of the people that was instrumental in establishing the growing of onions for exports in the South Island. And we established businesses and pack houses and established that aspect of agriculture in the South Island. So I think that's one of the primary reasons why I received that award, because it reflected that innovation. And as you can see, we have plenty of onions to put through a grading and packing facility. All these onions come in from the field, and they're gone into a store like this, and they're cured through a controlled environment where the temperature and the humidity is controlled, while the skins are cured so that they don't get too dry and they don't stay too moist, so that we get an onion that looks like that.
One of the reasons I think he won those prizes is his focus was to serve the community rather than focus on his own farm and do things for himself. So I had to keep the family going and look after the children while he was working and putting long hours working. So in a way, I think I have been contributed indirectly to his achievements. I hope he thinks that way.
Now, how many children do you have?
I have three boys, aged 7 through 16.
Is the farming bloodline going to continue with your sons?
I don't think so. They've got strong interest in computers and they're probably fairly academic, so I don't know whether they'll follow in the family's footsteps. The other aspect about agriculture in New Zealand, and particularly what we do, is there's a lot of machinery involved, so it's not very conducive to involving children. So they haven't probably had the background that maybe some of the pastoral type farming communities have.
You never know, as farming gets more computerised, your son will be more interested.
And I think New Zealand is the best place to bring the kids up. And I think my children got really good lifestyle, and they've been brought up away from the city and all the problems that city kids could face. So they've been lucky in that way. And they had very clean and peaceful environment here.
And here's a few kilograms of potatoes to have a look at. But definitely, farming is a business. We're run my farming business as a business. We have board meetings to discuss and make decisions. So it's very much on a commercial footing and becoming more and more so.
And what's your favourite thing about farming? What's the thing that makes you the happiest in your job?
Well, it's not always the money. Sometimes it can be, but most times it isn't. Farming is not considered generally to be a very profitable business, and most people do it for the lifestyle. It's very rewarding seeing plants grow, beginning the operation by sowing the seeds and fertilising and watering, irrigating the plants and taking them through to harvest, and then harvesting the resultant crop for the season. So that's very satisfying, and you can actually see what you're doing. And the other aspect is that you're actually producing something that you know that people need and want. It's actually a very rewarding profession from a social conscience point of view, where you're contributing to society, and it's very obvious what you're contributing, whereas some other occupations aren't quite so obvious.
Now, how has the Baha'i Faith affected your family life?
Well, I wouldn't be married to an Iranian if I wasn't a Baha'i. It has a major influence. And in the Baha'i writings, it talks about marriage as being not the marriage of two individuals, but rather the marriage of two families. And that's very important, because we don't tend to look at each other, we tend to look in the same direction, which is quite different to the way generally marriages happen in New Zealand, where two people look at each other, and then when they're looking at each other and they find a little fault with the other person, it can become a major obstacle. But with the Baha'i Faith being an integral part of our marriage and our lives, we tend to be looking in the same direction and working towards the same goals. And it's like working together in a team, and that's the way that our marriage works, and it works very well. And the aspect of having different cultures within the marriage is also quite unique, particularly in the area that we live in. But often that also, it can be as much of a help as a hindrance, because if in a marriage you have a disagreement, if you're from the same culture, you can tend to look at the other person as being wrong. When you're in a marriage of two different cultures and you have a difference of opinion, often you put that difference of opinion down to cultural differences, and you say, well, that's just your upbringing, my upbringing, and that's why we're different on this aspect, and we accept the differences much more easily, I think.
Now, how did you first come across the Baha'i Faith?
When I was 14 years old, I answered an ad in a local newspaper to go hay carting in the Mackenzie country. Now, I don't know if you know what the Mackenzie country looks like in the middle of summer, but it's very arid, and there's hardly a tree in sight. It was manual work, and it was probably more like adults' work, and I was 14, so it was very, very hard work, and it was always windy and hot. And one of the other people that went and did the same job as what I did was a Baha'i. He was a young man. I think he was 21, 22 at the time, so he probably found the going a bit easier than I did. We used to work under contract, so for every bale that we carted, we earned 11 cents, which sounds a princely sum, but in those days it was a very rewarding job for a 14-year-old. And so it was a piecemeal basis that we were paid on, and that gave us the incentive to work very hard. And it was hard work, and it was very stressful type of work. But every 2 or 3 hours we'd have a break, and we'd have this break under this. There was this one tree in the middle of nowhere with a mountain stream that came under this tree, and about every 2 or 3 hours, this man his name was Brett Keeman, would tell me a little bit about the Baha'i Faith, and I'd ask a question and he'd answer the question, and then I'd ask another question and he'd say it's time to go back to work, because we were working on a piecemeal basis. So we'd go back to work and I'd have 2 or 3 hours to think about what he just said, and he knew that in 2 or 3 hours' time I'd be back in the same position. So after 2 or 3 weeks of that, I got a good appreciation of what the Baha'i Faith was all about, and he gave me a book about the Baha'i Faith, and I learnt a little bit about it. And then, as a 14-year-old does, I forgot about it and put the book down, and yeah, so it sort of went nowhere originally, but that's how I first heard about the Baha'i Faith.
What was the book?
Bahá'u'lláh in the New Era, which is an introductory type book for people that want to investigate the Baha'i Faith.
And when after that did you actually become a Baha'i?
It was about 4 years after that, when I attended university at Lincoln College, which is now Lincoln University in Canterbury. And there was as students do, you talk about religion and different aspects. And I remember in a library once when people were talking about religion, and they started talking about the Baha'i Faith, and I knew these people not well, but I knew them a little bit, and I couldn't study because they were talking, and I was trying to study, and I talked about the Baha'i Faith, and they started talking about Baha'is wearing long robes, orange robes and things like that, which I knew was untrue. So I said, I popped up and said, that's not true, I know that's not the case, and I actually have a book on the Baha'i Faith, and I gave the book to one of these people, and that's when I first started thinking about the Baha'i Faith again. And shortly after that, there was a public meeting that was advertised at the university, and I went along to this meeting, and there was quite a number of people there. There would have been 30, 40 people, maybe even 50 people at the time, but many of the people were from another religion that went for the sole purpose of creating a problem at this meeting. And the Baha'is gave their presentation and were haggled by some of these people, and it was quite annoying and quite frustrating. But I was very impressed with the way that the Baha'is handled themselves and didn't get upset and didn't argue back to this haggling. And in the end, the people that were doing the haggling got that upset with themselves, and they stormed out. And the Baha'is never involved themselves in that debate. And those people that went to cause the problem recognised that I came to this meeting, and it was an agricultural university where generally people aren't that interested in religion, and they saw that I went to this meeting, so they hounded me to try and convert me to their religion. And the more they hounded me, the more I argued with them, because I, by that stage, had learnt a little bit about the Baha'i Faith. And every time I lost the argument, because they knew their religion so well, and I didn't know that much about the Baha'i Faith. So every time I lost the argument, I had to go and find out more about the Baha'i Faith until I actually was convinced on what I was reading. And it was very interesting, because later I found out that you shouldn't argue about religion. It's very important that religion should be the cause of love and unity, and not the cause of discord. So I later found out that's the reason why the Baha'is didn't argue and didn't create a scene back at that first meeting. And I didn't know that, of course, at the time, and that's why I argued, and I lost the arguments anyway. But it was a very interesting experience to go through, and in the end I actually believed in what I was saying, so that's when I became a Baha'i. So I was pushed into it.
Not by Baha'is.
No.
Now, what was the deciding factor that made you realise that the Baha'i faith worked for you?
I was brought into an Anglican family, and my mother still plays the organ at the local church, and my father was a lay reader. But they were never fanatical in their beliefs, and they were very open to new beliefs, even though that they've still stuck with their original church. But I could never understand when I went to Sunday school, an Anglican Sunday school, how that particular doctrine that we were learning was right and all the other religions were wrong. And we never learnt about Islam, for example, at Sunday school. We learnt about some of the old biblical stories, but we never learnt about Islam. So that was a mystery to me, why we didn't know about Islam. And was Islam from God or was it not? Was Muhammad from God or not? So when I first heard about the Baha'i Faith, and one of the principal beliefs of the Baha'i Faith is that all the major religions throughout the world, over a period of many centuries, are valid. That is the main religions like Christianity and Islam and the Old Testament, which is the Jewish teachings. So all those old religions are fundamentally a part of the Baha'i Faith and are accepted by the Baha'i Faith. So that was one of the things that really attracted me to the Baha'i Faith, is that religion is progressive and develops, and Baha'i Faith is just the latest link in that chain of development of the spiritual aspects throughout the world.
Tony, thank you very much for coming along tonight. It's a long way from Timaru, so I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you tonight. Thank you.
It's my privilege, and it was great to come to Auckland to the Big Smoke and share some of the beliefs that I have.
And thank you for joining us as well. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time on Baha'i On Air. I'm Vivian Lee. Ka kite.